The mountain did not yet know its name. It rose like a black wave against the dawn, vast and unmarked, its ridges catching the pale light of stars that still clung to the sky. At its feet, a silence lived, not the silence of death, but the silence of something waiting to be spoken. The rivers whispered down its slopes, but no hammer had yet struck its heart. The world was raw, unfinished, almost shy. And then he woke. Durin opened his eyes as though he had always been here, as though the stone itself had been dreaming and finally shaped itself into a man. His first breath was cold, tasting of moss and starlight. He stood among ridges no hand had climbed, and the world seemed vast beyond comprehension. Yet there was no fear in him. He was not born to be a wanderer. He was born to be an anchor. He walked with a slow, deliberate gait, each step sinking into the earth as if the land should remember him. The sky arched wide, trembling with stars, and still he moved as though searching for a sign. Somewhere within him was the knowledge that he would not simply pass through this world, he would build within it, and the stones would remember his name. At length, he came to a hollow in the mountain's flank, a pool still as glass, fed by streams so clear they seemed cut from crystal. It caught the stars with perfect clarity. Durin leaned over the water and stared, not at his reflection, but at what the sky returned to him. 7 stars gathered above his head, forming a circlet, a crown not forged by smiths, but gifted by the cosmos itself. His chest rose. He did not smile. Dwarves rarely smiled, even at the dawn of their story, but something heavier stirred in him, something like certainty. Here, beneath the crown of stars, the mountain offered him a home. Not a hut, not a shelter, but a promise, a kingdom beneath stone that would outlast rivers and storms. Durin knelt by the pool, dipped his hand into the cold water, and whispered a word that no tongue has kept, a first name for a place that would be called Khazad-dûm, then Moria, then legend. The mountain stirred. It was no thunderclap, no breaking quake. Only a breath, a faint echo of shifting rock, as if the earth had leaned closer to hear. The reflection trembled, and the stars on his brow seemed for a moment to burn brighter. Durin stood again, and when he did, the silence of the land felt broken. Now there was a rhythm, faint but undeniable, the promise of hammer against anvil, of stone hollowed and reshaped, of halls filled with firelight and song. Durin walked the slopes until dawn came, mapping his kingdom not with parchment but with footsteps. He touched stone faces where doors would be carved, measured bridges in his mind where ravines cut deep, and paused on ledges where towers could rise to greet the sky. The mountain was no longer nameless. It had become a partner in his vision. By the time the sun broke over the ridges, the land was not empty. In Durin's mind it was already alive with voices, children's laughter echoing through halls, chants of smiths, the grinding of wheels and gears, the ringing of bells in towers that did not yet exist. He could see them, his people, still sleeping beneath the earth, who would one day wake and follow his steps into the mountain's heart. Durin was not alone, though no other soul walked beside him. He carried in him the weight of an entire people, and when he turned once more to the mirror pool, he did not see only stars. He saw history waiting to be written. The crown above his reflection was not made of jewels. It was made of destiny. And so the tale begins not with conquest, not with war, but with a man alone in silence, gifted a vision by the stars. A king without a crown, staring into a pool of water, daring to believe that mountains could become home, and that stone could be taught to sing. From that moment, the fate of Moria was sealed, not as an accident, not as an inevitability, but as a choice born from wonder. The mountain would remember him. And one day, all the world would remember the mountain. The mountain did not remain silent for long. From hidden halls of stone, the others awoke, not scattered like leaves, but gathered, as though answering a summons. Durin was not surprised when he saw them, as though some memory older than himself had whispered, "You will not walk alone forever." They came with heavy brows and strong hands, children of the same deep making, their eyes carrying that glint of fire which the world had not yet named. Durin looked upon them and felt what the stars had promised, a people. The first nights were cold, spent beneath unshaped ridges, but even then their nature showed itself. Where other folk might huddle, they carved. Stone was not obstacle but companion, and before the moon had crossed its path a dozen times, they had opened the skin of the mountain and set a fire in its belly. That fire was small, no larger than a hearth, but the light it threw against the cavern walls was enough to make shadows dance like warriors in armor. Durin watched them as they worked, one hollowing a cavern with strokes steady as prayer, another chiseling marks into stone that no one else could yet read. He heard laughter echo off rock for the first time, and it filled him with a pride so fierce it bordered on pain. The mountain, once hushed, now carried voices. But with the laughter came rivalry. Some argued for the high places, desiring towers that would greet the sun. Others longed for the deeps, where veins of ore gleamed faintly in torchlight. A few whispered of the water mirror, that it was sacred, that no hammer should strike near it. Even at the dawn of their story, choice weighed upon them, and Durin, though first among them, felt the burden of judgment. He gave them a vision, not a city, not yet, but a promise. "We will make halls so vast that stars themselves could enter," he told them, his voice carrying across torchlit stone. "We will build doors that welcome friends and bridges that confound foes. Our homes will be song and stone both, and the mountain will never forget we walked within it." They listened, and though debate did not end, the vision stilled their quarreling long enough to begin. Stone answered them willingly at first. They carved a chamber whose ceiling glittered with crystal veins, and there they gathered to eat, to tell their first stories, to begin the long practice of being a people rather than scattered voices. The air filled with the tang of smoke and iron, the ring of chisels, the thunder of hammers, rhythms that would define them for ages. Yet as their tools struck deeper, the mountain revealed more than gifts. Strange draughts of air hissed up from cracks, cold as a grave. Stones sometimes fell without warning, even where supports had been strong. One night a worker swore he heard a rumble beneath the earth that sounded not like collapse, but like breath. They laughed at him, yet uneasily. Durin alone did not laugh. He returned often to the mirror pool, watching the stars gather above his head. Their crowns steadied him, but it did not erase the unease coiling in his chest. Greatness was being born here, he could feel it in the bones of the stone, but greatness was never without shadow. Still, he gave no voice to doubt. His people needed certainty, and certainty became his gift. As the years unfolded like pages in a book, their halls spread wider. They raised the first stair, each step carved with such precision it seemed poured rather than cut. They bridged ravines with single spans so narrow that armies could never march across them unchallenged. To the east, they prepared a gate, plain for now but destined for artistry beyond imagining. The mountain became alive with light, torches flaring along corridors, forges glowing, crystals catching the fire and throwing it back in 1,000 fragments. In the deeps, the miners struck their first veins of silver-bright metal, Mithril, though they did not yet call it so. The sight of it drew cries of awe, and for a moment the entire people stood together, breath held, as though beholding starlight captured in stone. Durin's heart swelled. Here was proof that the crown of stars had not lied. And yet, as he looked at the glittering vein, his shadow stretched long across the stone. Something deep inside him whispered that gifts from the earth always came with a price. He said nothing. The fire in the mountain was too young, and hope too fragile. For now, there was only light bright, proud, and ringing like an anvil stroke, echoing through halls that would soon be known to all the world. At first, it was triumph without blemish. The forges sang day and night, a chorus of sparks leaping like fireflies, echoing against the carved arches. The dwarves' laughter was rich, their beards bright with sweat and ash. The veins of Mithril deepened, a river of silver fire through the mountain's flesh. Durin walked among his people, hearing their pride, watching their skill shape wonders that had no equal in the world. But with each treasure came hunger. Mithril was not just metal, it was miracle. Stronger than tempered steel, lighter than feather, radiant as moonlight, it seemed a gift too great to refuse. And so the hammers struck deeper. Shafts widened, tunnels stretched downward, and each new discovery pulled them further into the mountain's dark veins. Some counseled caution. One miner, old and stooped, came before Durin and bowed low. "Lord," he said, his voice like gravel, "the air grows strange. The picks sing in a way I've not heard before. The rock beneath us is restless. There are sounds no earth should make." Durin listened. He had heard the same whispers, felt the strange breaths of cold air rushing from cracks that should have been still. Yet when he looked upon the mithril gleaming in his hands, he thought of what it could mean: armor no blade could pierce, bridges no weight could break, gifts worthy of friendship even with the proudest elves. "Our strength is in the stone," he answered, voice steady, though his heart wavered. "And the stone has not failed us yet." The people cheered when he spoke. The miner bowed again and said no more. So the delving continued. Months became years. Halls multiplied, the endless stair wound higher, and towers pierced the clouds. Yet below, deeper still, pick met rock with growing urgency. The air thickened. Torches sputtered where no draft should exist. Once, a tremor rolled through the mountain, small enough that no wall cracked, but strong enough that every heart stilled. Children began whispering of eyes in the dark. Miners claimed to see flames flicker where no torch burned. No one admitted fear aloud, but silence grew heavier in the deeps. Durin himself descended one night, carrying a lantern of crystal and flame. He wished to see what his people saw, to walk the places where their hammers struck truest. The mine stretched downward like a labyrinth, air colder the farther he went. His steps echoed until he reached a shaft where the walls shimmered faintly with veins of mithril. He placed his hand against the rock. Warm. Too warm. And then a sound. Not of picks, not of falling stone. A pulse, low and immense, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. It came once, then faded. The lantern shook in his hand, the flame quivering, and in that flicker he thought he saw a shadow move, vast, coiled, waiting. Durin staggered back, breath shallow. For the first time since he had woken by the mirror, he felt the tremor of fear. Yet when he returned to the surface, to the fire-lit halls and the eager eyes of his people, he said nothing. What could he say? That the mountain's gifts bore teeth? That the very stone they trusted whispered threats? To speak such things aloud would break them. So he was silent. But silence is not safety. The digging pressed lower. Strange accidents multiplied. A tunnel collapse that swallowed an entire work crew, a sudden fire that raged with no source. Some whispered of curses, others of forgotten spirits buried since the world's first wars. Still the mithril called, and still they obeyed. Then came the night when the mountain answered in full. A roar shattered the deeps, a sound older than language, fierce enough to split stone and drive torches dead. The ground quaked, throwing miners to their knees, and from the darkness poured heat, not the clean warmth of forge fire, but a choking, blistering breath. Shadows rose, blacker than night, edged with flame. Screams filled the shafts. Durin himself was there, racing toward the chaos, shouting commands, rallying his guards. But when he saw it, vast wings of smoke, eyes like coals older than suns, a whip of fire that cracked with the weight of ancient wrath, he knew the truth. They had not found wealth. They had woken doom. The Balrog, one of Morgotha's fallen terrors, sleeping through ages, roused by their hunger. It struck swiftly. Stone melted beneath its feet, walls crumbled, and the first dwarves who faced it burned before they could even cry out. Durin lifted his axe, defiance blazing in his eyes, but the flame lashed out and cast him down. His crown of stars became a crown of fire. Word spread through the halls. The king was dead, the mountain cursed, the enemy invincible. And so the laughter ceased. The forges fell silent. A people who once carved light into darkness now fled, their home behind them consumed by shadow and flame. Moria was no longer a promise. It had become a warning. The fire did not stop when Durin fell. For years after, the Balrog hunted the deeps, striking wherever dwarves still held torches. Kings rose, one after another, each vowing to reclaim what was lost, each consumed by the same fire. At last, the survivors abandoned their halls. Families wept as they crossed the gates, clutching what little gold they could carry, leaving behind an empire carved with their own hands. The silence that followed was heavier than flame. Moria, once bright with hammersong, became hollow. Bats roosted in the rafters of kingly chambers. Orcs crept into the tunnels, filling the void with their guttural shrieks. The bridges that had been marvels of defense became choke points for ambush. The doors, once shining with elven runes, were shut and stones swallowed the light. Centuries passed. The mountain no longer sang, it moaned. Stories of Durin's Bane spread like plague. Few dared speak the Balrog's name aloud. Children learned it in whispers, shivering at the thought of flame in the dark. Yet the dwarves are not a people who forget. Grief turned to longing, longing to defiance. Generation after generation spoke of return. One day, they said, the hammer will fall again in Khazad-dûm. That day seemed to come when Balin, cousin of Thorin Oakenshield, rose among his kin. His voice carried a fire that reminded many of the old tales. In the ruined halls of Erebor, beneath dragon-scorched stone, he gathered a company. Why should Moria remain silent while we live? He demanded before the council. His hands trembled as he slammed them against the table, but his eyes blazed. Our fathers bled for those halls. Our mothers raised children in their light. Shall we leave them forever to shadows and orcs? Whispers spread. Some muttered of madness, of pride repeating its curse. Others looked into Balin's face and saw not arrogance, but love. We are exiles no more, Balin declared. If Khazad-dûm is a tomb, let us be the living who break its seal. And so, against the warnings of the cautious, Balin led them east. The journey was long, but when they reached the Mirror, a hush fell. The water reflected the stars just as it had for Durin, centuries before. Some swore they saw the crown above Balin's head. He smiled, faintly, as though the mountain itself had welcomed him home. For 5 years, hope flickered. Orcs were driven out of the upper halls. Forges glowed again. Balin was hailed as Lord of Moria. Songs returned, though quieter than before, as though sung by throats afraid to be too loud. Children's voices echoed in chambers that had not heard laughter in an age. But shadows are patient. In the deep halls, orcs multiplied, rallying to masters unseen. Strange ripples disturbed the waters near the western gate. Doors that had once opened freely groaned, as though warning the dwarves who pressed them closed. Then came the arrow. It flew from the dark, striking Balin as he stood gazing into the mirror. He fell without a word, his face still turned toward the stars. The dwarves who carried his body back to the Chamber of Records wept openly, their laments shaking the stone. In Balin's tomb they carved his name. Ori, his companion, wrote in the Book of Mizarbal, "We cannot get out. Drums, drums in the deep. They are coming." The words themselves seemed to carry the tremor of doom. Orcs poured from the lower halls, trolls smashed through pillars. The watcher in the water coiled outside the gate, cutting off escape. One by one, Balin's followers fell. Ori himself, quill replaced by sword, fought until the last torch was extinguished. And then silence again. The halls became a grave. Balin's tomb lay cold, surrounded by the wreckage of shields and broken blades. The book remained, waiting for other eyes. Above, the mountain loomed indifferent. But in the stones beneath, the memory pressed like a heartbeat. Moria was no longer only the ruin of Durin's pride. It was now the grave of Balin's hope, the echo of a people who dared to believe they could kindle light in darkness, only to be swallowed once more. And still, the Balrog waited, its fire banked, its shadow coiled. The stage was set. For when others came, not dwarves this time, but a fellowship of all free folk, the mountain would demand another sacrifice. The fellowship entered Moria like trespassers in a cathedral. The gates behind them closed with a thunder that rolled through the hollow dark. Ahead stretched corridors older than kingdoms, their silence so deep it pressed upon the chest. Every step echoed. Every whisper seemed to trespass. In the chamber of Mizarbal, they found him. Balin's tomb lay beneath a scatter of broken weapons, a single shaft of light falling across the stone. The Book of Mizarbal, battered and torn, rested nearby, its pages smudged with blood. Gandalf's voice trembled as he read the last words. "We cannot get out." Drums in the deep. And then the drums answered. A rumble, faint at first, then swelling until the walls themselves seemed to pulse with it. Orc cries joined, high and jagged, like the shrieks of carrion birds. Troll steps shook the stone. The fellowship stood surrounded by the memory of death, and now death itself came to repeat the chorus. Steel clashed. Arrows hissed. The chamber erupted in chaos, Frodo struck down by a spear, Boromir dragging him to his feet, Legolas loosing shafts into the dark. Yet the true terror was not the orcs. It was the heat. It crept into the chamber, thick and suffocating. Shadows deepened though the torches blazed. A roar, low and thunderous, rolled through the passages. The orcs faltered, fear breaking their ranks, scattering them like leaves before a storm. Then they saw it. At the far end of the hall, flame bloomed. Not the clean orange of forge fire, but a hungry, living blaze that wrapped itself in shadow. Vast wings of smoke spread across the ceiling, a whip of fire cracked, scattering sparks like meteors. The Balrog had come. Durin's Bane. The terror that had slain kings, that had driven a people from their halls, now stepped into the light again. "Fly!" Gandalf's voice rang through the chamber, raw and commanding. "This foe is beyond any of you." They ran. Through twisting corridors, across bridges as thin as blades, the fellowship fled, the roar of pursuit hammering at their heels. Flame licked the walls. Ash fell like snow. The ground trembled beneath the monster's steps, each one closer, closer. At last, they reached the bridge of Khazad-dûm, a narrow span over a chasm so deep it seemed to fall into the heart of the world. The abyss yawned black beneath them, endless and hungry. Gandalf turned. His eyes were not afraid, though the fire reflected in them. He raised his staff, white flame meeting shadow. "You cannot pass," he said, his voice steady as stone. The Balrog paused, whip coiling, fire seething around it. Then it stepped forward, each stride cracking the bridge beneath. "I am a servant of the secret fire," Gandalf cried, wielder of the flame of Aenir. "The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Yidden." The words rang like hammerstrokes. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though the mountain itself listened. The Balrog struck. The whip lashed, the sword of fire fell. Gandalf met it with staff and blade, sparks exploding like stars. The bridge quaked, shards tumbling into the abyss. The roar of flame battled the roar of the wizard's defiance. Then a shudder. Gandalf's staff smote the stone, and the bridge cracked. With a thunderous roar, the span split. The Balrog fell. For an instant, victory breathed in their chests. But the whip lashed upward, searing through smoke, and coiled around Gandalf's legs. He staggered. His companions cried out, Frodo's voice breaking, Aragorn's hand reaching. Gandalf looked back once, eyes fierce and bright. "Fly, you fools!" And he was gone. Dragged into the abyss, swallowed by shadow and flame. The fellowship froze. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to halt, the silence unbearable. Then Aragorn's voice cut the air, to the door. They fled, hearts broken, the mountain echoing with their grief. The eastern gate opened at last, spilling daylight over them, but the light did not feel like victory. It felt like loss. Behind them, in the dark, Moria closed its grip again. Durin's Bane still roared in the deeps, and Gandalf was gone. But his stand, his defiance, became more than a battle. It became a covenant, a moment where centuries of fear and ruin were met by one voice that said no. In that abyss, Moria claimed another legend. And the world above would never be the same. Moria did not die with Gandalf's fall. The fellowship carried his absence like a wound, but the mountain endured, as mountains always do. In its veins still burned fire, in its chambers still echoed silence. Orcs lingered. The Balrog coiled in the deeps. The air remained thick with smoke and memory. But memory is not only sorrow. Long years passed. The Wars of the Ring ended. Sauron was broken, his towers thrown down, his shadow scattered. The world shifted into a gentler age. And in that age, the dwarves remembered as they had always remembered, the halls where their fathers had sung and died. Durin's line did not fail. From it came a king who bore the name of the first, Durin the Seventh, called the last. His was not a reign of conquest, but of restoration. He did not march with armies to claim Moria in a blaze of vengeance. Instead, he came with builders, miners, singers, children, a people who would not let silence be their only inheritance. When the doors were opened once more, no roar greeted them. The Balrog was gone, destroyed in a battle the world would scarcely believe. The orcs had scattered, leaderless and broken. What remained was ruin, but ruin is not emptiness. They walked the broken bridges, rebuilt the collapsed stairways, lit torches in chambers that had known only baths and dust. Every hammerstroke rang like an echo of the past, but also like a heartbeat of the future. Where Balin had fallen, they placed garlands and lanterns. Where Durin had first seen stars reflected in the water, they knelt, and for the first time in an age, the crown of the heavens shone again over Dwarven brows. It was not triumph. It was healing. For the mountain did not forget. Its walls still bore the scars of fire, its depths still whispered of shadow. The dwarves did not try to erase these marks. They carved their new halls alongside the old ruins, let moss cover some wounds, left other cracks open as reminders. To live in Moria again was not to pretend it had never fallen, but to honor that it had risen once more. Children grew up chasing their own echoes through the same halls where their ancestors had fled. Songs returned, not the same songs of pride and certainty, but quieter ones, deeper ones, that held both sorrow and joy. The mountain, once only a tomb, became a home again. And in the stillness by the mirror, when the stars crowned the water, some said they saw more than their own reflection. Some said they saw a figure standing behind them, tall, grave, with eyes like stone and fire both. Durin the First. Watching. Approving. What is a kingdom but memory made solid? Moria was never just stone and steel. It was the echo of voices, the rhythm of hammers, the light of stars caught in the dark. It was ruin, yes, but also resurrection. A reminder that even the deepest shadows can be answered, not with denial, but with persistence. The dwarves of Durin the Seventh did not claim immortality in those halls. They claimed something quieter, something truer, endurance. And so Moria stood again, no longer only the tomb of kings or the lair of monsters, but the greatest of dwarven mansions. Not untouched, not unscarred, but alive. When travelers passed through in later ages, they would hear the steady ring of iron on stone, the laughter of children chasing through colonnades, the chant of miners at work. If they paused by the eastern gate, they might see the Ithilden runes glowing once more under moonlight. Speak, friend, and enter. The words, once a warning, now felt like a welcome. And perhaps that is the truest ending of Moria's tale, that after fire, after shadow, after centuries of silence, the mountain learned to speak again, not in drums of doom, but in the living song of a people who refuse to be forgotten. The last hammerstroke fades into the dark. The mountain remembers. And the stars still wait above the water.